Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Foundation for Science and Technology event. Warm welcome to our participants here at the Royal Society, and also to our online participants, who of course can put your questions as well by going to Slido at the code shown here on the screen. We're talking about industrial strategy, and particularly science and technology's contribution to industrial strategy. And we have a wonderful group of speakers, either currently involved, as is Julia. We're going to hear from Julia Sutcliffe in a moment, who was appointed Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Business and Trade in 2023, and Julia has been to several of our events, and I do appreciate her personal interest in both what we do at the FST and her commitment to industrial strategy. And we've got, I'm trying to think of the right way, calling Mariana and Greg veterans of industrial strategy may be a bit hard, but industrial strategy is back. Industrial strategy is back, and we've got here people who were involved in it earlier on. Mariana, of course, having thought about it and written about it, and I can still remember the excitement of reading The Entrepreneurial State. In fact, I've been influenced by Mariana for so long, I can even remember when it came out as a pamphlet from Demos, and it had a big impact on my thinking. And it's great also to have my friend and former colleague, Greg Clark, who I think can still claim to have produced, as the Secretary of State, the fullest, most sophisticated account of industrial strategy we've actually seen. And it's great we've got him as well. But no discussion at the FST would be complete without the direct experience of someone from the world of business and technology. And it's great that we also have Dr. Peter Waggett, who is IBM's research director in the UK, so has to practice it. So we have a wonderful group of speakers. I should thank Airto, who are our sponsors this evening, for their commitment. And what we're going to do is we'll hear from our four speakers in turn, and then we'll all assemble on the panel, and there'll be time for Q&A. First of all, Julia, over to you.
Okay, good evening, and thanks for the kind words of introduction. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight at this wonderful moment of national opportunity. And what a privilege it will be to share the stage with some of the absolute thought leaders of industrial strategy, a real honour. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give you two perspectives that I hope will complement those of my fellow speakers. The first is that of an end user. Having spent a large part of my career in industry, I've been on the receiving end of an industrial strategy. And the second is that of an insider. So as CSA in the Department of Business and Trade, which co-leads the industrial strategy with Treasury, I've got an inside view. So, to begin with the first perspective. Before my role in government, I was Chief Technologist at BAE Systems Air Sector, where I spent about 25 years in the technology-intensive aerospace defence security sector. And during that time, I worked here, I worked internationally, I had the opportunity to work with companies big and small, with academia, with entrepreneurs. And it's sort of rather stating the obvious, but to turn a profit and to stay ahead, businesses need to innovate and turn ideas and technology into tradable outcomes, competitive products and services. And whether you're developing robotics for human-machine teaming in a digitised factory or applying new materials to reduce the carbon footprint of aircraft, the role of science and technology is a critical enabler. But turning that technology into trade is super, super hard because so many factors need aligning. So technology itself needs to be ready at the right time. We know it all matures at different time rates, so compare the rapid refresh rate of AI in your phone to the development of quantum sensing for brain imaging. Development cycles, service lifetimes, business models are all very different, and it requires planning and agility. Skills, obviously, need to be available, but not just the technology skills. So technicians, engineers, scientists, really important. But so too are the skills that will help you deliver programs, to scale your business, to raise finance, to manage risk. So without the right wraparound of skills, innovation can't prosper. And you need infrastructure, physical, digital and data infrastructure to connect the ecosystem, enable development, test, qualification and certification. Without this, innovation can't flourish and products can't reach the marketplace. Regulation. We would expect innovative, disruptive, groundbreaking technology to challenge accepted practice. So it's essential that regulators are part of this innovation journey as well and have incentivization that allows them to support growth. And finance, of course, has to be accessible along every step of the innovation journey. Whether you're in a large corporate or a university spin-out, innovators need access to capital at all points, from the lower stakes, lower TRL, right the way through to the high stakes, high TRL. And then markets, export and competition. Businesses compete for market access and market share. So bringing competitive product to the right market at the right time is critical. And the domestic market, of course, might not be big enough, so you might need to export and access the international market. And these are just some of the things that need aligning. Whether you're trying to establish floating offshore wind capability or developing a supply chain for semiconductors into batteries, into gigafactories, into electric vehicles, it's a similar set of hurdles. And overcoming them requires government, industry, academia to have a shared vision and to align resources. And when you do, targeted investment accelerates collaboration. It drives onshore innovation, creates self-sustaining ecosystems, allows different sectors with different capabilities to share ideas, and creates deep expertise that can endure over decades through the people, the businesses, the institutions, and the places that it creates. This is what an industrial strategy can do. So it was my first question to the Permanent Secretary when I joined the department about 2 years ago: are we going to create an industrial strategy? And my wish has come true. So, to the second perspective, my role on the inside. Growth is the #1 mission of this government, and industrial strategy is central to that. The Green Paper set out the vision for a modern industrial strategy, Invest 2035, a 10-year plan to deliver the certainty, stability that businesses need to invest. Now, we all know the context is really challenging. In the 20 years before the global financial crisis, productivity grew at around 2% a year. And in the near 20 years since, it's grown by less than 1%, which has created a huge impact and challenge. But the opportunity to build on our strengths is rich. We've got high-quality research, innovative firms, a global trade outlook, regulatory frameworks that are trusted, standards and competition institutions that are trusted, highly skilled workforce, so it's all to play for. And the aim is to enable the UK's already successful services and manufacturing sectors to adapt and grow, whilst seizing opportunities to lead in new sectors that result in high-quality, well-paid jobs, and that also shape the type of growth we get. So we're seeking to support net zero, regional growth, and economic security and resilience from the outset. So policy is going to be guided by principles of long-term stability, the power of strategic government to coordinate and align, commitment to free and fair trade, and easing the investor journey. It's going to be international from the start and developed in lockstep with local and regional leaders, devolved governments and businesses in a structure of partnership and prioritisation. So to science and technology, enabled by and an enabler of the industrial strategy. So across each of the priority sectors, science and technology is going to be vital in driving growth. Let me give you some headlines. Strengthening our research base, supporting our startups, our scale-ups, ensuring success in global markets is going to build on strong foundations. We are only the third country in the world to have a technology ecosystem sector valued at over $1 trillion. And the digital and technologies stream is going to ensure a focus on emerging as well as existing sectors. Advanced manufacturing, another sector for growth, sees almost half of the UK's private sector R&D investment, is a high productivity growth sector and generates over $200 billion a year. We're already home to one of the largest aerospace clusters, for example, and produce around half the world's large civil aircraft wings. Life sciences, almost 7,000 businesses which generate over £100 billion of turnover. We recently celebrated John Jumper and Dennis Habersis for their game-changing AlphaFold technology. It won't be the last time that AI has underpinned scientific breakthrough. Defence supports over 500,000 jobs across the UK and applies some of the most cutting-edge technology that spins out into other sectors of the economy. Clean energy industries. The energy transition we know is going to require large-scale application and integration of new technology from hydrogen to carbon capture, use and storage, with over £1 trillion of projected opportunities for British businesses out to 2030. Financial services, we're a global financial centre with significant export potential, from algorithmic trading to increased reliance on superfast, low latency, global fibre connections, and the latest advanced models. Science and technology is playing a key role in fintech. Creative industries give us a clearly recognised global brand with the third largest creative services exporter globally, and technology is playing an ever-increasingly important role across gaming, media, film, sport, fashion, etc. And the eighth sector that's been identified, business and professional services, £174 billion in exports in 2023. That's 20% of all national exports, 1 in 7 jobs across the economy. So it's a large and diverse sector with opportunities for science and technology to generate growth across accountancy, advertising, legal services, engineering. So this is where my point of making the integrated system work well sort of really comes into play. For science and technology to deliver on the opportunities, we've got to align the entire system with our objectives for growth. A future in which regulators, as well as protecting consumers, are incentivised to drive growth, where academia, as well as delivering fundamental R&D, works with industry and finance to drive adoption in the economy, where government removes barriers to growth across the system, ensuring that pathways deliver national capability. So, where are we now? Well, firstly, thank you to all of you who responded to the Green Paper consultation, which closed last week. The teams, as you can imagine, are working extraordinarily hard to distill the terabytes of substantive responses, which will be a priority activity into the new year. This is a really, really exciting time. It feels a bit like being in the Matrix, with verticals and horizontals, sectors, enablers, cross-cutting policies and bespoke solutions. But this is the task, to coordinate and work in partnership to set the foundations for businesses, innovators, entrepreneurs and individuals to thrive. And this is what makes it so interesting and why it feels such a privilege to be on the inside helping this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Julia. And now we turn to Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who is Professor in the Economics of Innovation and Public Value at UCL, and she is indeed the founding director of UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. I had the great pleasure of co-chairing an exercise at UCL with her on how we could implement manufacturing, an industrial strategy. I think an exercise that began with a request from Greg Clark. So it all comes together in the end. Mariana, over to you.
David forgot to mention that we also had a very good minibar along the way in our commission. So it's a huge honor because in fact we've come full circle, haven't we? The journey actually at the Institute began in 2018 when I founded it, which was all about how do we bring public purpose back to the center of how we think about economic growth, which, as Julia rightly said, doesn't just have a rate but a direction, and how do we take advantage of all our strategies, industrial strategy, innovation policy, financial policy, to actually solve big problems, and how do we do it in an economy-wide way, which requires also an interministerial coordination and definitely an intersectoral approach. And, let me see. Are they going to come up at some point? Fantastic. And we worked together, and it was such a pleasure, David. We worked together on the Commission for Mission-Oriented Innovation and Industrial Strategy, MOIS, M-O-I-I-S, and I'll get to it in a minute. But it was really in the back of conversations, I think, Greg, that you and I had literally the day that I set up the Institute. And the question was, how do we actually transform an ambitious strategy, which in some ways you had inherited from the Vince Cable coalition when he was in, David Cameron's coalition, but with Vince Cable in the position that you had, moving away actually from a sector-based approach, right? We can all make lists of sectors. At the time it was aerospace, automotive, finance, the creative industry, and life sciences. Kind of a random list, think of all the sectors that aren't listed there, towards a challenge-based approach that requires all those sectors and other sectors to innovate, to invest, especially in a low investment country, towards actually solving some of the biggest problems of our time. And it wasn't about getting rid of the horizontal conditions. Of course we need basic research and development. Of course we need catapult centers where science and industry linkages happen. Of course we need a skills base. Of course we need a good visa system, regulatory policies, and so on. But we need to transform, this was the request, if you want, the conversation, what used to be the verticals, which was just random lists of sectors, often those that lobbied their way up to be considered the top sectors, towards, again, problems that many different sectors require to innovate, to solve. And the reason I wrote Mission Economy was that that's how we got to the moon, right? There was the big problem, well, the challenge was the space race, beat the Russians, Sputnik, but the mission was to the moon and back in a short amount of time, and it required so many different sectors, not just aerospace. How would the astronauts eat? How would they go to the bathroom? What would they wear? That required cross-sectoral innovation in nutrition, materials, electronics, software, of course aerospace. But the main thing, it also required government to change how it was working. The first thing they did was to change how procurement was done, away from cost plus towards challenge-oriented procurement with incentives for innovation and investment. And so that bottom-up experimentation that we require across many different sectors to achieve net zero, to achieve health-related challenges, reducing the digital divide. That is what I personally believe should be leading our industrial strategy. And while it's wonderful that Keir Starmer has brought this idea of missions back, I've been a critical friend, a thorn in the side, as one may say it, which is, growth is not the mission. Growth is the result if you get mission-oriented industrial strategy right. Why? Because missions require investment. We are 28th in the OECD for business investment. We are last in the G7 for public investment. Had we invested half as much as the average OECD country did in the last 2 decades, we would have invested 500 billion more. And again, business investment is absolutely critical, but you don't achieve that with so-called business-friendly policies. That often just leads to things like tax incentives which increase profits, but don't increase investment, and we don't get the additionality, helping investments to happen that would not have happened otherwise. So these massive structural challenges, as Julia said, around productivity, these are results of not having invested enough. But what does that mean? How do we really get those dynamic public-private partnerships? I often call them symbiotic partnerships, leaning on the words of biologists who never are fluffy like economists when they talk about ecosystems, right? An ecosystem can be predatory, it can be parasitic, it can be symbiotic or mutualistic. How do we build the true symbiotic, mutualistic partnerships that actually I think we had getting to the moon? And again, great that we have this mission-oriented approach, but what I want to say is let's really take advantage of it, and instead of it being slogans, how do we use it to transform our industrial strategy so growth is the result? So the NHS, which is not the mission, is a key institution for health-related mission at the center of an industrial strategy, which will require a different relationship between public and private actors in a space where, dare I say, we have had lots of parasitic partnerships. I'm allowed to say this. I'm an academic. I'm not going up for election, so I can be as thorny as I want. Sorry, very self-promotional, but thank you for reading The Entrepreneurial State. But just to say, the only reason this is up here is that my own journey as an academic, and mainly through the journal articles and PhD students that I have, but also with these books where I try to bring these ideas to the layperson, is this really requires rethinking how we even understand the economy. Where does value come from? If the state is going to play an entrepreneurial state role, it means rethinking value. Value is collectively created. It means not thinking about fixing markets, but shaping markets. And how do we really drive collective intelligence at the center with new contracts, a new social contract? And the big con, by the way, is that we can do none of this if we continue to outsource our capacity in the civil service to the Deloittes of the world. Of course, Deloitte, I'm sure it's a great company, but 1.5 million a day to do a test and trace system was the result of actually not having invested enough in our digital governance, of actually, think of the infodemic side of COVID. That itself, we know, was central, and if we don't invest as part of our industrial strategy in our ability to govern digital platforms, we will be over-reliant on the consulting companies, which really should be on the side, not at the center of delivering some of these key areas. So the work that we've done in the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose has been bringing some of these ideas at the center. Instead of having, the environmental strategy and the net zero mission somewhere off in the Department of Energy, a mission-oriented strategy means bringing these ideas of big problems that we need to solve to the center of how we think about economic growth, but especially at the center of how we rethink the design of policies, and I'll focus on industrial strategy, but it's not just that, the design of the tools, procurement. What's the difference between an outcomes-oriented procurement and just a cost-plus procurement? A new social contract, a real opportunity to drive massive collective intelligence between public and private actors, but that doesn't happen just by saying, oh, we're going to do this together. It means actually rethinking intellectual property rights. We currently have an intellectual property rights system where patents are way too wide, used for strategic reasons, way too strong, hard to license, and way too upstream. That's a bad contract, right? The intellectual property rights are not rights from God. They are rights from the state. You get 17 years of monopoly profits, fantastic. It can incentivize innovation, but not if we govern those patents problematically. And that really would have to go at the center of a rethinking that. Co-creation participation is more interesting. I'm not going to talk about it now, but for the city level work we've done, including in Camden Council, 250,000 people live in Camden. And Camden, working with Georgia Gould, who's now in the Cabinet Office, rethinking public sector reform and institutions like procurement tools, really working with Camden citizens around the Camden-based industrial strategy and mission-oriented strategy was fascinating, especially around the participatory structures. And bringing back, if we think of what's happened globally with elections, bringing back trust in people that this policy-making process will actually deliver on their everyday lives, we know that's critical, and the dynamic capabilities that, as I mentioned. So super quickly, really what I want to convince you about is we actually need to not think this is either missions or R&D and science. Having the biggest problems of our time, and every country, including the UK, has signed up to the SDGs, we sometimes think they might be very lofty, but turning these challenges, like the net zero ones around climate, like the ones around water, think of the huge water problems we have in this country, like the issues around poverty and zero hunger, into national strategies and problems that, through democratic fora, which then require investment, require innovation, technological, organizational, and social innovations is what a mission-oriented strategy does. For the Apollo program, the challenge was beat the Russians. The mission was to the moon and back in a short amount of time. It required lots of different sectors, but it especially required bottom-up experimentation. There was 400,000 people that got us to the moon. And it was super interesting, again, that the first thing they did, Ernest Brackett was his name, the head of procurement, he changed the way that the NASA was working with the private sector from being this, dare I say, parasitic, again, just cost-plus procurement, where the costs to NASA were just rising without getting the job done, to a mission-oriented procurement, fixed-price procurement with incentives for innovation and quality improvement. What happened? We got all these innovations, camera phones, foil blankets, baby formula, software. The history of these technologies were that they were solutions to problems that the astronauts actually faced. Strong direction from NASA, but again, bottom-up experimentation. So it's this real kind of delicate balance between the two. I had the honor to work with Carlos Moedas, who's now the mayor of Lisbon, but he was the head of the DG for Innovation in the European Commission. I brought this to him, and he translated it into policy. So today, In Europe, there's a 30 billion euro instrument called missions, and on the back of that, they actually chose 5 different missions, one which is around net zero, one is around healthy aging, and so on. And the work, again, with Greg and with David was amazing because you listened, you turned the sector-based approach into a challenge-based approach, these 4 challenges. I must say the data one was a bit odd because data and AI go across all missions, of course, or all challenges. But then the work we did together, which was fantastic with David, was turning, for example, the future mobility one into a mission, which was a mouthful, less sexy than to the moon and back. It was by 2040 to put the UK at the forefront of safe, sustainable, universally accessible travel, creating congestion and emission-free zero-accident systems. And the fact that it was kind of a moonshot, in terms of innovative criteria were there, meant that some of those bottom-up projects had to be, for example, in the world of disabilities. Innovation, investment was required around, for example, having 100% accessible public transport. So you see the point, right? The different sectors there, it's many more than just those so-called top sectors, but you require innovation and investment to satisfy that mission. It requires an all-of-government approach in the same way that going to the moon was not just for one sector. Climate change, of course, is not just for the Department of Energy, an interministerial approach to a mission-oriented approach. The tools, I mentioned some, this is going to be very quick. We worked very closely with countries, including in Germany, where because they had a very clear strategy around energy called the Energiewende policy, that required their tool, which already existed, a public bank, and remember this country is setting up new public funds, to change how it was working with industry. So instead of just giving bailout money or a loan to the steel sector, which globally, including here, is asking for money, there was an innovation target. You can get a public loan from the KfW conditional that the sector reduce the material content of production. And that's the only reason there's green steel today in Germany, because it was required as a direction. How they did it was up to them. Repurpose, reuse, recycle technology across the whole production chain. Procurement, huge opportunity for this. We worked on it in Camden around adult social care, but really interesting, for example, in Sweden, their challenge is a fossil-free welfare state, and it lands on the everyday, including school meals. School meals in Sweden have to be healthy, tasty, and sustainable, which means that the way that the Department of Education and Health interact with the food supply chain is through an innovation angle. You can't just produce. You might remember when Reagan said that ketchup was a vegetable. Some of us had T-shirts with Reagan and ketchup, and which was the vegetable, but that gets into politics. Anyway, so the point is, an ambitious moonshot around school meals requires innovation, investment around something as normal as lunch, so normalizing the moonshots. New social contract. We work very closely, someone mentioned to me, with Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce of the US, around the CHIPS Act. What does it mean when you have something like a grant to the semiconductor industry and different subsidies to make sure that it's an opportunity to steer growth in a different way? 2 minutes, oh, that's plenty. I only need 1, but now I get 2. So the conditions in the CHIPS Act, which was close to $400 billion for semiconductor companies, was that there was a goal, but the main thing was that they also pay their workers better because they weren't getting paid the living wage. They use energy-efficient supply chains, and critically, that the profits generated from this collective value creation that I began with get reinvested back in. Why? Because a huge problem around corporate governance, it's not about being business friendly, but how do we actually work together towards a problem and make sure that the profits being generated from that are reinvested back in instead of just given out as dividends, or in the case of the US economy, lots of money being spent on share buybacks. Over $7 trillion have been spent by the large corporates in the US just on buying back their shares to boost stock prices, stock options, and executive pay. And they accepted because that was the condition to work together. ScotWind is very interesting in Scotland around some of this conditionality. Participation, I said I wouldn't talk about, so I won't. I'll just say it's increasingly important at the city level, and the whole kind of leveling up agenda, which is about also place-based industrial strategy, lots to learn in different cities. In Camden, the green agenda was debated, actually at the center of some housing estates, and people talked about what green meant for them. But super interesting was turning food banks into food cooperatives, green food cooperatives, so the ownership, the dignity, the self-value that people feel goes as part of the process. And this is very important, I think, for our democracies. The food missions in Sweden I already mentioned, but they also have very interesting street missions. And I'll just finish by saying without public sector capabilities, none of this is possible. So hugely important for any industrial strategies to remember that outcomes orientation needs to be implemented. Cross-ministerial coordination is a skill to learn. NASA had to learn it. On the back of the Apollo 1 fire, Gus Grissom, and I'll end with this quote, Gus Grissom said, the day he died, right, because the 3 astronauts were burnt to death, said, how the bleep are we ever going to get to the moon if we can't even talk between 2 or 3 buildings? Because they literally couldn't hear what was being said in mission control room. And on the back of that, NASA changed its structure. You now know it, how it's structured, similar to DARPA, with the different project managers, each with a delegated team, but in constant communication one with another. But all these are skills, and if we don't invest in those skills, it's very hard. So that's the end. There's all sorts of myths around mission-oriented policies. I just encourage you to read the report that we've just written on global insights, what we've learned, what works, what doesn't. Growth is not the mission, but growth is surely the result if we can actually catalyze this massive wave of public and private investment around the biggest problems of our time. Thank you.
Well, that was certainly a whistle-stop tour, Mariana. Thank you very much for that. And you will have captured, I think, in the final slide, the relationship between the public and private sector, including risk sharing. And that's a very good introduction to our next speaker, Dr. Peter Waggett, who is IBM's research director in the UK, because he was also involved crucially in the original design and introduction of the Hartree Centre for Digital Innovation, a partnership between government and IBM, where both parties put in funding and also share some of the risks and some of the performance objectives. So it's great that Peter is with us today. Over to you, Peter.
So, thanks everybody, and it's great to follow on from that talk. I mean, my PhD was in rocket science, which for me has always been great, because if somebody says this isn't rocket science, I can say, can't help you. But having looked around for the next most exciting career I could find, either I've got limited imagination or there's really been something in this IT research area that's kept me going, and hopefully it's the latter. And what I want to try and do is take you through why I think it's important, both as a sector, but also as an enabling sector. Then show why we've got some of the problems, some of the challenges we get with this adoption of the technology. And finally, take you through the Hartree as an advertisement for you to come and talk to us and see how we can help you with real-world problems. So the exam question was looking at how science and technology can help. And the three sort of like use cases: growth. Now, most people talk about growth, and we see growth happening in the economy, but it's fractions of a percent, something like that. The challenge that we've been setting ourselves has really been trying to say, okay, how can we make an order of magnitude improvement? How can we tackle, cut times by a factor of 10? So, we're talking about really trying to make step changes in some of these things. Other things that have happened with us have been clearly COVID. Short, sharp period when, we just really needed to throw the kitchen sink at a problem and try and bring it in. But all the way through, we've still got behind us this sector like climate change happening that, is going to provide us problems as we go forward. So, given those sort of like challenges, I still believe that, the scientific method is really the sort of like best model we've got for discovery. And it's a complicated graph, and I probably don't expect to pick it up, but, clearly, life expectancy, GDP, per capita, and populations have all been growing quite happily against some of these big challenges that we faced. And, COVID was one, but, we had the Spanish flu, we had different things coming through. And really, what I'm trying to show in this graph here is that, we've got these different scientific methods we've been using. Now, this is where I'm probably going to get stoned if there are any data technologists in the room. I think that, we've been seeing this evolution of the scientific method, and I think we're really at a turning point where, frankly, we can't afford just to use big data. We cannot afford to keep churning more and more data for less and less results. We need to be smarter about it. And what we've been trying to do is look at this thing that we're calling accelerated discovery. And to try and give you a flavour of this thing here, this is, different people call it different things. The military call it the OODA loop. We've got the scientific method, different sort of things on there. But, really it's how we make progress. We hypothesize, we test, we report it, we feed back in, and we keep going through that loop. So the challenge we set ourselves, and this is part of the thing that we've got to underpin the Hartree work, was what happens if we throw all of the technology we've got at that problem? So, at the left-hand side, don't just rely on the fact that as a researcher, I'm completely on top of every single publication that's been published in my field, such that I can always make the informed decision. You can't. I mean, the data rate is just getting too high for individuals to come up. So, can we use AI-powered deep search techniques to actually drill into things, understand context, understand why something is relevant, and make sure that A, we don't make the same mistakes we've made in the past, but B, actually sort of like get to the target that we're looking at quicker. So all of those things are things that, we've been trying to build up and try and develop. And we've been aided by, paradigm shifts that are happening actually in the hardware that we're using. So clearly, quantum technology is, in terms of computing, is something that's really starting to gather pace. If you think about it, the real world is quantum-based, so, we need to actually make sure that we use the same sort of tools and techniques to explore it, such that we can do progress. Now, it's not to say that, the standard high-performance computing are going to be completely outdated. They're not. They're all part of a picture, but we're looking in different dimensions to tackle different use cases. So biology, we really need to start using AI. Physics, we need to start using quantum. And mathematics, clearly, we just carry on with our HPCs. So all of those things are tools that we can use. So, you might say to me, well, okay, why is that easy? Why isn't that happening? Why isn't it easy? And I come back to really the work that was done by a guy called Jeff Moore in California, who said, look, if you look at the marketing textbooks, the 101 textbooks, you've got a new technology, the idea comes along, visionaries pick it up, it becomes mainstream business, it's adopted, eventually gets superseded and it drops off. Well, what Jeff pointed out really was that actually, for high technology, you get a complete gap between the innovators and the business. So the technologists understand the technology, the business understand the business. The two of them don't talk the same language, they can't put themselves together, and they can't work out how to bridge those activities. So opportunities are missed. So one of the things that we've been doing, and one of the key things behind the Hartree is, can we play in that chasm? Can we actually start to put together multidisciplinary teams such that they can tackle these problems in such a way that each side sees the benefits of what's going on. So the business people understand how the technology can help their business. The technologists understand what they need to do to make it attractive to them there. So, that is a key part of what we've been trying to do. And really, it's all about this thing of having teams that can speak the same language as the teams on either side. So that's what we're about trying to do. And that's really in the UK what has attracted us as IBM to come and work in this space. And as has been mentioned, the Hartree for us is a singularly impressive project in terms of globally, there's nothing like it elsewhere. And I'm in the hugely privileged position to be able to tell my colleagues in the 16 other countries where we have research labs is that come to the UK and we're doing something and see what we're doing and how we can actually make it more impressive to you. So the premise that we had with the Hartree was that we have an organisation, STFC, that provides huge facilities for things such as CERN, such as the diamond light source to industry that can be useful. Now, their traditional customer have been the academics. To move them into the industrial space, turned out we actually needed to work together because we understand the industry, they understand the technology, we can put the whole thing together. So, as was said, and hopefully this is a symbiotic partnership and not a parasitic one, as has been mentioned before. But really what we're about is trying to get the best of the public and private sector researchers working together. And this program for me has been an absolute joy. Decision making is 50-50. So SDFC and IBM sit on a management board that actually decides which projects we're going to go at. Those projects are judged against the impact we're making in UK industry. We take this whole process right the way through. So, the teams are split between industrial and academic and public sector participants. So it's a truly joint program. We hope it brings together the best of both worlds, and it provides a platform for UK industry. And the platform we've got is built around these series of programs. Explain is really where we're trying to provide high quality training and education for technologists and managers and business sectors, such that we can actually get across, why should I worry about AI? Why should I worry about quantum systems? What's in it for me? For the business community, as well as actually helping the practitioners move their activity forward. That's provided free of charge, and certainly there's a catalogue of programs that anybody in terms of UK industry can come and actually pick up and work. We've got an online platform, or you can come and do it in person, but all of that stuff is available, and currently is something that anybody can pick up. We then move on to Explore, and this is the key project for us. In this one, what happens is that an industrial partner in the UK comes to us with a challenge. It could be a challenge which is worried about a threat from a different sector, or it could be worried about, can I actually get the benefits out of AI? So what we do is that we take that problem statement, we break it down into a proof of concept. It's not just a technical proof of concept, and this, I think, is the key thing that we would stress. We also provide a business template so that the industrial partner can see what we've done and understand how to implement it. So this for us has been a great sort of program. The Explore program is done at no cost to the industrial partner. Clearly, they have to fund their own people, and we may be asking them to bring data to us, but our teams are funded to actually remove the entry barriers for a sector that wants to actually play in this space. So, we can get people coming along to us and saying, I've got a glimmer of something that may need AI to actually deliver it, and how we go about doing that is that, we will take that, give them their business concept, and they can go off and then decide how to do with it. As they move down the chain, and I do apologise because marketing got involved in this chart, so it has to be an E for Accelerate to match the other E's in the programme. But in Accelerate, there's a whole range of options. Frankly, a customer, a client we're working with could come to us and say at one extreme that basically, love what you've done, and take it away and do it myself. That's fine. That for us is a success. We've got somebody in the UK that's moved up the notch, and that's great. The other extreme is to say, we haven't got the skills, we haven't got the capability, can you run it for us? Now, that's also fine, but that comes with a cost. So the Hartree won't fully fund all that activity. So those are things there. And the final program we've called Emerging Technology is really trying to future-proof the technology. So what we're actually saying is that don't worry about whether you're able to do this now. We can make sure that whatever solution we deliver is ready for the future coming in. And that's at the moment where a lot of our quantum technology sits. So that's all I really wanted to go through. And I think I'm just about on time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now we turn to the right on Greg Clark, who, of course, was the Secretary of State for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy and led the creation of a previous industrial strategy. He was then elected as the chair of the House of Commons Select Committee on Science and Technology, and now he is Executive Chair of the University of Warwick's Innovation District and Chair of the Warwick Manufacturing Group. Greg, over to you.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Gavin, for inviting me. It's good to be back and see so many familiar faces, not just in the front row, but here at the Royal Society. David was characteristically modest in referring to my role and Mariana's role in coming up with that industrial strategy of 2017, but he had a major role himself. I remember many a summer day being spent in the garden of David's house in Havant when we were writing drafts with Mariana on speed dial to produce this in time for the autumn. I took the view, and thankfully David, who's been my great friend and mentor over the years, took the view that it's actually quite fun to roll your sleeves up and do the writing yourself, not just to get others to do it. You, of course, need to involve others in seeing it, but there's something special about doing the first draft, and David was an absolute trooper in that, and has a lot of credit for what emerged there. What I thought I would do, just to introduce what I'm looking forward to as the discussion, is say something, so 3 observations about the new approach to industrial strategy, and perhaps highlight 5, just briefly, 5 challenges that I think it should address. So the first of the 3 observations that I would make is that it's good to have industrial strategy back. When David, Mariana, and I, and lots of people in this room were working on the 2017 one, we'd hoped it would be there for the long term. And we did a number of things to try to embed it, but clearly that didn't work. So it's a happy circumstance that we are able to have this meeting in the context of a new industrial strategy. And the reason for that is not just kind of amor propria. It's that I thought and think that in a world of change, in a complex world, in a world of international competition, but also cooperation, it's good to be clear and explicit as a government and as a country about what you're doing. You shouldn't expect people to read your mind. To set it out there so that others can see it seems to me to be advantageous. And in so doing, actually it helps you think about the policies and the investments and the priorities that you have yourself. So it is a useful exercise. Sometimes people in my party and David's party, the Conservative Party, have sometimes been very sceptical of industrial strategy, thought this is not really something that Conservative government should be doing. And I've always found that rather mystifying because the party has like to think of itself as being in tune with business. And I try to imagine the chief executive of a business at an annual general meeting taking a kind of question from the floor from a shareholder to say, question, how do you see the future and how is our company going to prosper in the future? And were that chief executive to say, well, we haven't really thought about it, we thought we'd just sort of play it by ear, we'll muddle through, I don't think they would get a terribly good reception from that AGM, and I don't think any government that took the same approach should get a very good reception from the electorate. So it's good that it's back. The second thing is that I think it's good that there is an intention that it should endure, that it should be a strategy for the long term. Not to say it shouldn't change from time to time and adapt, but its intention is that it should endure. And the reason we know this is the government has been very clear that they will intend to set up an industrial strategy council on a statutory footing. So it can't be abolished in the way that the Industrial Strategy Council that I set up and persuaded Andy Haldane to chair, which he did extremely well, was scrapped by one of my Conservative successors not many years after I introduced it. So I think that seriousness of purpose to ensure that it, or at least to try to ensure that it endures, I think is commendable. And the third observation that I would make, and these observations, as you sense, by way of nods of approval, is that the government, I think, has been sensible enough and kind enough to draw on some of the work that we've done in this room. We did put a lot of time and thought into it, and many people in this room contributed to it, and people outside this room in sectors, in businesses, in universities, research institutions, trade unions, local authorities, put a lot of thought into it. And rather than, as is sometimes the case with new governments, and I can I've served in a government that was newly elected. Sometimes you can go to a kind of year zero approach and everything that was done before is a load of rubbish. Actually, they haven't done that. And Jonathan Reynolds, the Secretary of State, has been kind enough on multiple occasions to reference the work that Mariana, David and I were associated with, and to say explicitly that it will be built on and used. And I think the Green Paper, which I think is a very good Green Paper, it's a discussion paper, clearly does that, clearly draws on and references that. So 3 cheers for, I think, the way that they intend to approach it. In terms of the challenges that I think the government, and we all, as part of the community that want this to succeed, need to address. Many of them have been touched on by my colleagues earlier, and that is not surprising, that's a good thing. And the first is that it needs to be integrative. If you think of a strategy, most people's first thought of a strategy is that it's a plan for the future, and so it is. That's important that it should be such. But I've always thought that there's another sense of the word strategy, which is a strategy can integrate different strands, different policies in the government sense, different sort of views of the future, and to be a kind of clearinghouse to make sure that they point in the same direction and don't trip each other up or contradict each other. And that's important for the reasons that a number of the speakers have said, that in government which perhaps inevitably tends to be organised in silos of departments, and these departments can be kind of great baronies, and they can end up by pursuing policies that are not congruent and can be sometimes incompatible. When I was the Secretary of State, as is described in the slide there, it says business, energy and industrial strategy. That was quite a lot to be going on with. I had a lot of things there. But actually the title didn't include a very important part of it, which was science, innovation and technology, the research budget, which was also part of the department. So a lot of the tools, a lot of the policy instruments for industrial strategy were in one department. Now, for better or for worse, there have been machinery of government changes that have created the Department for Business and Trade. They've brought trade in. But energy is now in a separate department, energy and net zero. Science, innovation and technology is in DCIT, a different department. So there has been a bit of a fragmentation, and I understand the reasons for that, to have the focus. But it seems to be more than ever before, when you don't have a single department that had all of these different things in, you have to be very integrative within government. And I hope that will be the way that the government will interpret that. And if you think of one application of that, take the future of mobility, electric vehicles and other types, and autonomous vehicles for that matter. Clearly it involves the Department for Business and Trade, Julie's department, but obviously it involves the Transport Department as well. Insofar as it affects energy, it's the Department of Energy and Net Zero. Clearly, in terms of innovation, DCIT, and probably other departments as well. Certainly the Treasury will be included, perhaps when it comes to the operation, charging points and such like, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So all of these things, it's extremely important, I would say, and I dare say Peter from his commercial experience would confirm, you can't be sending innovative businesses around the houses of Whitehall, as it were, sort of knocking on multiple doors and expecting us to be competitive with the rest of the world. So an integrative approach, I think, is important. The second challenge, I would say, is that it seems clear that this is a world that there is not much spare money available. we've had the budget in recent weeks. In our time, and David heroically in his time as the Universities and Science Minister protected, even during the time of austerity, the science budget. I managed, as a result of the persuasiveness of the industrial strategy, got an increase, which was then the biggest ever percentage increase in the science budget, from 9 billion a year to 12 billion a year. As it happens, after my time, it was increased from 12 billion to 20 billion a year. So we've had a rising public sector research and development budget, but I would be surprised, I'd be delighted if it were otherwise, but I don't think we should expect to see such major increases in the budgets. That's to say, new money that was available, because we were able to use that new money to create things like the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund that supported many of these missions that Mariana talked about, that didn't need to, as it were, sort of take money from Peter to pay Paul. It was additional money, so we were able to do that. That, I think, is going to be more challenging. And one of the thoughts that I have about that is that in a world of little new money, some of the other tools that government have, particularly in the regulatory environment, government has a proposal to create a new Office of Regulatory Innovation, RIO they're to call it. And I think there's probably more mileage there than, frankly, we really focused on in the 2017 industrial strategy, to see how we can use the power of government to make a difference to the country and particular industries and challenges through being innovative in regulation. So that would be the second challenge that I would have, to think about innovation, to think about regulation in the context of innovation. The third is that I think it would be particularly important, and if it hasn't been realised, I'm sure it'll quickly become apparent, that delivery is going to be important for a newly elected government. The Labour manifesto had a single word on the front cover: change. And if you run on such a bold slogan and you distill your message down to that, then that will be, no doubt, produced at the time of the next election, and people will ask, well, what's changed? And we might think that we're at the beginning of a new parliament, but as David knows, these things progress very quickly. And given that we no longer have a fixed-term parliament, that in the coalition we knew that the parliament was going to be 5 years, it's normally the case that governments go to the country after 4 years. And given that the election was in July, normally in May, we may well have an election in May 2018. So, in other words, not much more than 3 years. We're nearly at the new year. So that's not much time. And so how do you deliver? How do you make a change in that time? My reflection on nearly 7 years working in government, in Whitehall departments as a minister, is that you have to do it through partnerships. Whitehall departments very rarely, if ever, do things directly themselves. They usually do it in partnerships with businesses, partnerships with local councils and mayoral authorities, partnerships with universities and research institutions. So getting those partnerships up and running, many of them already exist, of course, but delivering, I think is going to be important. And to do that at pace, if we've got less than 4 years, I think it will require an agility of approach. Some of the policies, no doubt in the industrial strategy, will be new ones, but they need to be implemented through partnerships very quickly to produce a result. So the fourth of my 5 challenges that I see that the government will have to face is, and it's been touched on by others, what was called in the last administration levelling up. That's to say, the kind of prosperity of the whole country. Very important, rightly, for this government, and it's been a big interest of mine. Apart from industrial strategy, one of the things that I spent most of the time on in my ministerial career was creating these mayoral authorities and devolving power to them. That means that we have in place arrangements that we didn't have in 2010, and we're only really beginning to kind of get underway towards the end of our time in government. But now you do have these authorities. Some of them are very capable. You can make use of them. But some of them are either new, or some of them perhaps inevitably haven't developed the momentum that others have. And my approach there, my advice to the government, would be to be quite activist in that. If there's an opportunity in a region that really needs to do well and they don't have the capacity, then partner with them and help them with that and roll up your sleeves and help them do it. And I hope that they will. And the final challenge, and I cite them as challenges because they're not easy to resolve, and thoughtful people and well-meaning people in government will have to think carefully about them. But it's a challenge that is familiar to everyone in this room and in this building, which is the challenge of maintaining, and not only maintaining, reinforcing excellence, especially when it comes to science and research and technology. But at the same time, making sure that places right across the country benefit from the investments and the policy that we have. Classic question of science policy over the years that David grappled with, as I did, and others before. I think the partnership approach has a lot to commend to it in that respect. I think it would be wrong to starve or to undermine our most excellent and highest performing institutions and to take money from them and send it elsewhere. But we have, when we're thinking about the whole of the country, we have the benefit of really strong institutions. And I'm not just saying this because I'm now at the University of Warwick, but that is certainly one of those institutions in places, the West Midlands in that case, but you can think of the University of Manchester, you can think of Sheffield, places right across the country who are really important in their regions, but really strong nationally as well. And I think an approach that we have greater partnership between institutions, especially those in the Golden Triangle with the rest of the country, I think can be very productive and in many ways translating ideas into practice, so that where we have innovation, it goes to the full final mile in turning that into jobs and local impact, I think is important. So I'm delighted that we're able to have this conversation tonight, because we're able to do so because we have a green paper that is about to become a white paper over the months ahead. Everything I see in the government tells me that they want to do this seriously and well. I think the FST in putting this event forward is doing a service. I'm sure both through Julia and others, this will be transmitted to our friends in government. They're my thoughts, very subjective thoughts, but someone who, with our colleagues here, has tried to give it a go, but very much look forward to the expertise in this room that we can add to what the government has taken in the consultation that's just closed. Thank you very much indeed. Shall I stay up here? I'll go with it.
Great. Well, what excellent presentations we've already had. A great introduction to the subject. And we now turn to you for your questions. I know that Mariana, and by the way, I apologise, I think we've understated your name. Mariana, I know, has a firm deadline, has to go at 8. So if Mariana walks out at 8. It is not in protest at some point that has been made. We understand that. So let's begin straight away by collecting some questions and comments from the floor. And also, I would encourage our online participants to go on Slido as well. Any comments as well as questions? Welcome. I see several hands coming up. Let's start here at the front where I see 2 questions. If you could give your name and organisation, please, that would be brilliant.
Thank you very much. My name's Stuart Martin. I've worked in the space industry. I'm a former CEO of the Satellite Applications Catapult, and now I work with Lord Willetts on the board of the UK Space Agency. One of the companies that I've worked with over the last 10 years, we started working with them from scratch. This year they signed £100 million worth of orders for their product. None of it with the UK, all of it with European partners and around the rest of the world. And so my question is, in the context of industrial strategy, we seem to be very squeamish about doing anything that might be seen to influence activities around the market perimeter, and doing something that actually might support the co-creation of markets, as Mariana suggested it. And I think this is also part of that chasm, Peter, that you talked about between the technology evangelists and the pragmatists. And how do we actually move the pragmatists towards the better understanding of the market? And I wonder whether, and I generally believe that, certainly for our industry, what we see is a lot of support for research and development, a lot of support for startups, and then a lot of support for exporting. And very little, there's very little help in actually helping get the technology get traction within our own markets. So we're actually helping everybody else in the world improve their productivity and not doing anything for our own. We've lamented the lack of productivity growth as part of this discussion already. So I wonder now, is now the time for within this current generation of industrial strategy to be more proactive in the actual co-creation of markets, which is an expression I really like, or around the market perimeter, and actually get better at adopting these new technologies as we create them.
Thank you very much. And let's collect a second intervention right behind you. So if you pass it to 2 rows behind you. Yeah. There we are.
Thank you very much. Jeremy Clayton, University of East Anglia, previously Director of the Government Office for Science. One thing which strikes me, having listened to the discussions so far this evening and looking at the executive summary of the Green Paper, is that the executive summary nowhere mentions the word mission. There's a lot of good verticals, a lot of good horizontals, a lot of good stuff in it, but is mission a dirty word in Whitehall for some reason? And if so, why is that the case?
I think, Mariana, we might start with you, your observations on that, and perhaps if you want to touch on Stuart's other question as well.
Sure. I mean, the reason I actually wrote The Entrepreneurial State back in, well, you got the 2011 version, but the proper book version in 2013 was precisely to kind of try to dismantle these myths of where innovation comes from. So the only reason we got the Silicon Valley kind of outcome was through a decentralized network of what I called entrepreneurial state institutions across the whole innovation chain. So it wasn't like, oh, we have really good basic research in some universities, and all we need is venture capital and some catapult centers here and there, and then stir the soup and hope for the best. It was a very active. The U.S. ironically taught Jefferson but acted Hamilton, but through purpose-oriented organizations in the public sector which accompanied those private institutions across the chain. The Death Valley period, which everyone talks about, is often 15 years. VC has a 3 to 5 year exit strategy. So how the US filled that was through patient finance, not through development banks, which is what lots of other countries do, like in Germany, but for example, through the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Program, research program, which we tried to copy but forgot to spend money on it and forgot to bring scientists into it to evaluate. So you have the National Science Foundation type funding. We kind of have that. They have the DARPA type, outcomes-oriented innovation funding. They have the InQtel, the biggest public venture capital fund almost in the world in public venture capital fund apart from Yazba in Israel in the CIA. They have outcomes-oriented procurement. You just keep going down even on the demand side, and the outcome of that is this kind of innovation-led growth. So I think the main point is you can't have a patchy system. right? It's not about doing that and then that. It's that whole kind of distribution. And then, of course, that whole mission-oriented point. Where's the person who asked it? Sorry? Where'd you go?
Yep.
Yeah, missions. I don't know. I mean, I actually don't get it. So the power of the missions approach, it's not just like vision, goal, let's go do something. At least for me, having studied these mission-oriented agencies for a very long time, I got interested in it from the organizational perspective first, right? DARPA is a mission-oriented organization. What's a mission-oriented policy design? It's having a goal that then requires that cross-sectoral innovation and the tools of government to change to foster that bottom-up experimentation in the business sector. It seems that the government, which, I think it's great that they've used the concept, but they've used it really just to talk about some, goals, right? Like, we want growth. Of course we want growth. Who doesn't want growth? Has anyone ever achieved growth by wanting growth? No, right? So having an industrial strategy that requires both public and private investment in a country that has very low public and private investment needs to start with what the missions actually are and have them really directed, bold, inspirational, cross-sectoral, so on and so forth. So, no, they're not doing it, but they should do it in order to satisfy the growth-related mission.
Very good. Julia, do you want to comment particularly on Stuart's question and kind of what more, which in a way complemented Greg's observation that there may not be a lot of money to spend, so there's a regulatory opportunity. There may also be a procurement issue, and there is now a new legal framework. What's your observations on that?
So I would say that, I was firstly going to mention that I was really struck by Greg's point around the sort of integrative nature. These are complex systems problems, super challenging, with so many different facets that need addressing and aligning, as you sort of mentioned there, Mariana. So I am encouraged by the progress I see with things like the Regulatory Innovation Office, the new approach to procurement, that there is appetite across government for addressing the barriers to growth, for example. And certainly that is definitely the sort of dialogue around working together and how to get that collaboration. But it's super difficult. It's really challenging. I mean, the 5 missions, you've seen them published, and they're in the manifesto, and sort of pulling in the missions whilst doing the industrial strategy and trade strategy, etc. It's a big systems problem in of itself.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to comment on those questions?
So to Stuart's point about making sure that you drive productivity, you have take-up in this country, I think that's really important. So one of the things behind the last industrial strategy was to concentrate on the fact that productivity performance in this country has been sluggish, been more or less flat since the global financial crisis. And if you want to increase national productivity, which we need to be able to be more prosperous as a nation, then sure, you need to extend the kind of frontier of technology and what is possible. But you can make a big difference to productivity across the country if you can diffuse what's already available. You can have it taken up. And so my view is that it's important that the industrial strategy not only reinforces our ability to operate at and to extend the frontier of knowledge and discovery, but also attends to the need to be active in spreading that across the country and doing things to make it get taken up. We funded, and it continues actually, the government is continuing the funding for something called Make Smarter, which is about helping smaller businesses outside London take up digitalisation. And I think there's more of that to be done, but it's absolutely in line with what you're saying, Stuart.
Thank you. Peter?
I think some of the things that we found with the Hartree, and in this instance, we're working with real customers coming in. Some of the challenges we've had have not been technical. It's been trying to understand the IP position and how that actually gets played out. And that, to me, is slightly disappointing because, if there's a risk-reward type activity, you really want the companies that are saying, okay, I'm just going to be faster than you, and I'm just going to go out there and take it, rather than come back and say, well, can I protect this bit of IP? So for us, the technology usually is the simple bit. It's the issues around the IP that cause us some challenges.
I would add one observation, which is especially in this kind of integrative issue that Greg referred to and other people have referred to. What is, if you just look at it from a sort of narrowly Whitehall perspective of the 5 missions, it is striking how a department that could be part of the delivery is also put in the chairing it. So, for example, the mobility mission, which we've now learnt is going to be interpreted as early years investment, is chaired by the Education Secretary, who is kind of marking her own homework. You could argue that if you really want to have an integrating approach to social mobility, you have the Education Secretary as certainly one of the members of the committee, but one of the advantages we had in coalition, often these kind of committees would have been chaired by Nick Clegg, for example, challenging lots of Tory ministers about what we were doing. It might be that Pat McFadden, who seems to be a sort of power in the land, should chair it, and then it wouldn't just be the DFE, it would be sort of, what's the Department of Health doing about nutrition for younger people as well? So I think it's a slightly literal-minded interpretation of the government's 5 overall missions to put one department in responsible for it. Now, I'm going to quickly run through 3 or 4 of the online questions for the panel, and then we'll go back to people physically in the room. And there's one question which has come up a bit, which is skills development and the roles of universities, what they can contribute, question number 1. A second question is about business sectors, and we all know the classic examples of highly innovative advanced tech sectors: pharma, aerospace, defence. How can we go beyond that if we are to broaden Britain's economic performance? And then thirdly, and I can't resist this, I'm going to start with Greg, and as you're now at Warwick, should the industrial strategy try to save the UK car industry? So, Greg, why don't you start?
Well, I'll start with that because I think the UK car industry is very valuable. And when we think about the UK car industry, there's a volume car industry, but there's also the motorsports industry around Oxfordshire, Northamptonshire and Warwickshire. Very important in a kind of Mariana-like way in terms of, the discoveries that are made in terms of materials and propulsion for some of those F1 teams have great applications elsewhere. And a lot of that's done in the Warwick Manufacturing Group, which I now have the privilege of chairing. So I don't think we should interpret industrial strategy as seeking to save a sector, but what I do think it should do is to look at areas in which we have strengths and assets, and to consider whether these are areas that in the world of the future, and I mean the world in the future internationally, whether these are going to be in demand. And if the answer is yes to both, if we have strengths and they're likely to be in demand, then I think we should look through our innovation project, looking at the kind of regulatory regime to see what we need to do and what we can do to keep them competitive. And so I think the automotive sector, the mobility sector, if I can call it that way, I think is very important in that. And it's one of the things that we did in creating the Faraday institution, for example. The Faraday Challenge was one of the challenges in the industrial strategy. And the idea that we should, given our strength in research at the cutting edge of battery technology, we should be continuing to look at, as it were, the batteries of the future. That seems to be something that is something we're good at, is something that's going to be in demand. So I think we should do that.
Thank you very much. Peter?
I mean, I think for me, the car industry, I'm probably a bad advert in that I went from a Tesla to a mini convertible. However, I will
from a Tesla.
From a Tesla, so I went the wrong way, in theory. But it's just so much fun, and it really is something that encapsulates the British car industry, and it's perfect. But the other thing is that some of the projects that we get involved with are really sort of like trying to pave the way forward. So a big project was the Mayflower autonomous ship, which was a ship that basically sailed from Plymouth to Plymouth, completely unmanned. And for us, that was a huge challenge, particularly as we had all of the senior executives of IBM peering over our shoulder every time it had a slight glitch. But the technologies around some of these things are just moving at a phenomenal pace, and we really, we need to be deeply embedded in some of these things.
Thank you. Mariana?
So just if the question is, should we be thinking of what our kind of key business sectors are, my whole thing was, no, don't do that, because you'll end up getting captured by particular sectors who tell you that they are the best sectors ever. And then you get really, kind of, dare I say, stupid policies like the patent box, because it was lobbied for by the pharmaceutical industry. The patent box makes no sense, and I know no innovation economist who supports it. Patents are already an incentive to innovate. You get, again, 17 years, as I said, of monopoly profits. There is no reason to reduce the tax earned by the profits from a 17-year monopoly. It makes no sense, and yet we have it, and it was lobbied for by a particular firm in a particular period in which the life sciences was the sector, one of the 5. So I think we need to learn from that mistake. And what we need is, again, of course we need a strong life sciences sector, but the question is how to structure that relationship to require the investment and innovation that otherwise would not have happened. Those metrics of additionality, that's what we'd call it as economists, really matter. Otherwise, you also end up getting badly designed R&D tax incentives, which increase profits but don't increase investment. This country has no profits problem. We have an investment problem. So we should learn how to do it better. In Holland, for example, R&D tax incentives are based on the labor hired to do the R&D, not the profits generated, which can be easily gamed. So my experience is any country that starts to worry about sectors, not only do you maybe not know what's going to happen to that sector, so you're kind of going to be too little too late later, but it also, again, opens you up to different types of capture problems. That then a whole point of a mission-oriented approach is that by actually having the mission, it requires that sector, whether it's life sciences or steel, to invest and to innovate and to do what they wouldn't have done otherwise. And then you help them if they're willing. So, moving away from picking the winners to picking the willing, I think really matters. And just quickly on Europe, I think it's really important to remember how different we are from most European countries, right? We don't have public finance. We don't have patient long-term finance like the KfW. 80% of UK finance goes back to finance. Finance, insurance, and real estate absorb 80% of UK finance. We have quick finance. We don't have the patient one. Our catapult centers, sounds good. We spend 10 times less than the German Fraunhofer Institutes. And we also, we don't have to talk about Brexit, but it is the big elephant in the room, have lost out on that kind of environment, that market, which is what drives business investment. Businesses invest when they have the expectation of a market or kind of technological opportunity. So that's a huge question. How not just to fill the gap, a bit of research funding here and there, how to really create a market for the businesses that we want to be investing here, I think is the biggest challenge that this government has. And we shouldn't forget also that tiny countries like Denmark, it's literally tiny, Denmark today is the #1 provider of high-tech green digital services to China. And China's spending over $5 trillion on greening its whole manufacturing chain because they have to, given their huge problems of pollution and so on. And looking at how that happened is super interesting. It wasn't about having startups or incubators. It was the startups that did exist, which were kind of doing nothing. They were just there. I don't even know why we talk about gazelles. Gazelles are animals that are like eating grass and all of a sudden run really quickly and then get eaten by a lion. And like that's a good model of high growth innovative companies. No, they grew because Copenhagen wanted to be the greenest city in Europe. And they are today. And those demand-side policies, again, created a market actually for these cute little startups that were just starting up and then dying. And they were able to work with the national champion, which was Vestas. And ultimately, they became real innovators, attracting capital today, not because of tax incentives and less regulation and whatever we think attracts capital, but because it's the coolest place to be if you're interested in high-tech green digital services.
Yeah, and interested, the KfW, by the way, when we did look from time to time whether we could create one, creating a British KfW would have been contrary to the rules of the single market. It existed because it was grandfathered in as it had been set up before the single market rules, just like the BBC, which could not have been created under the rules of the single market. It is ironically one of the effects of Brexit, you could argue, is to finally enable Britain to escape from the rigorous Thatcherite rules that were imposed in the formulation of the single market, so that we could now create a KfW, which is kind of what I think this government is up to. Julia, do you want to comment? And if I may, particularly the university issue, because for those who engage in close textual analysis of what your department publishes, they did observe the almost complete absence of universities from the Green Paper, which is both important for delivering skills and also a high return services sector in its own right.
Okay, thank you. So I think as you were speaking there, I was thinking about sort of staying power, the clarity of purpose and focus for the long term, so the decadal plans. But when I think about my time in the aerospace sector, 10 years isn't that long. And actually to create things like the sort of energy sector sort of opportunities that we're talking about, you know, floating offshore wind, for example, large-scale, complex, integrated systems, you need absolutely the ideas generation, the universities, the sort of SMEs, the university spin-outs, with blueprints for how to do that so people don't get worn out with complex IP wrangling at an early stage, etc. But you need that sort of staying power to create, from a systems perspective, all of those different strands of technology and capability that actually are near neighbours with other strands of capability in the economy. So links between auto, links between aero, links between sort of energy systems. There are links across those economic sectors, if you want to call them that. So I think building on the foundations of the academic sector is super important, but enabling it to sort of create a bigger impact into the sort of industrial application of technology across sort of vast systems kind of opportunities, if you like, with some of these sort of large-scale areas where we would like to have strong domestic capability in the future. It is essential.
Right, thank you. Now, I accept your restless, and Mariana, we completely understand. You've got to whiz off.
Unfortunately, it's just to a room next door to do a presentation for the UN Secretary General, who is interested in all these issues.
Right. I sometimes think when you get to see Mariana, she squeezed you in between the Pope and the UN Secretary General. And it's very good of you to do so.
No, but I might make it for a drink or two after.
Yes, come back and have a drink.
I'm so sorry.
It'd be great to have a Prosecco. What I suggest we do, because let's make this the final round. We'll go around the whole, but if everybody can make your interventions very brief, let's just create a quick flow. And so, Gavin, there's a hand up there, and I'd say if everybody puts their hands up, we'll try to get everybody in briefly. Yeah.
I'm William Duncan. I'm here representing Strathclyde University.
Pardon?
Is the microphone on?
Yeah.
I'm William Duncan. I'm representing Strathclyde University. My question is about how you will process all these responses that have come in an intelligent way that will recognise self-interested lobbying from the gems that they will contain.
Very good point.
Because that process is important.
Especially the one from the Resolution Foundation we sent in last week. Right, come down. Yep, there we are.
Andy Sellers, so I represent Southampton University. I chair Cornerstone, their Photonic Integrated Circuit Centre, which is world-leading centre. My question is about, in the light of geopolitical changes, a new administration coming into the US and sort of retrenching of investments across the globe, should we align our industrial strategy and our emissions with our international partners, or can we do things alone?
Very good. Now, I thought I saw a couple of other. There must have been. We've done very badly on this side of the room. Anyone? Oh, yes, there you are.
So, David Connell of Cambridge Judge Business School. With my colleague, Bobby Reddy, we've just published a report entitled Selling Less of the Family Silver, which argues that the principal challenge for UK innovation and industrial policy is the early sale of so many of our most promising companies to overseas multinationals and the truncation of growth in the UK. We analyse that problem. We look at companies like Arm and Autonomy and Dyson that have avoided that for at least a time, and propose a whole series of recommendations and a reallocation of the money from Treasury-based subsidies to other programmes. Can I ask the panel, the speakers, do you think we're right in that assertion? Can you see anything in the Green Paper which suggests that the government thinks that is a key part of the problem? And if not, what do you suggest?
Thank you very much. That was an excellent paper, I remember. And then the back there, yep.
Hi, Alex Brogan, King's College London. Just quick thought then, are we focusing too heavily at the top end of the sort of high-tech manufacturing at the cost of the pipeline towards the high-tech?
Right. I think those are the interventions. I'm going to start with Julia, but if I may, Julia, add one more question to you, which is that the science and technology is the theme today. And if you look at the 8 pillars of industrial strategy, one of them is advanced manufacturing, and the other is digital technologies. And there are a group of technologists, which I guess we'd now call the deep tech sector, who are not totally clear which pillar they fit into. And is there a kind of hardware-software divide in those 2 pillars, and is that healthy? How? Because so your interpretation of where technology fits in would also be helpful.
So I think this is where we're in the matrix, isn't it, with the sort of horizontals and the sort of verticals at the moment. So it's really important that, as well as ensuring that the sort of areas where we think we can get supersized performance in growth, if we line up all of these levers, that's great. Technology will enable that, but we also want to make sure that we are able to explore emerging sectors, so new sectors, areas that don't exist as a core part of the economy now. So making sure that the digital and technologies pillar, if you like, is able to support emerging sectors as well as underpin some of the existing priority sectors is important. So I think it might seem complicated, but I think it's actually necessary to have that.
So it's digital and technology.
Correct.
So it's all technologies, not just software.
Correct.
So deep tech fits in. Right.
Correct.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Right.
And then in terms of the sort of analysis and synthesis process, so there's a whole body of sort of engagement ongoing with roundtables, business as usual engagement, sort of sector councils, etc., to work through the evidence as it's been sort of presented and to develop those 10-year plans and to sort of work together through partnership, as I mentioned. It's not easy. It's going to be challenging, but that's the job. That's what needs to be done.
Very good. That's the spirit. Thank you. Peter?
I think one of the areas that, I've been most excited working with in the UK, as part of the Hartree Centre, has been the SME market. And I think they've got the most difficult job. Going from 10 to 100 people is a phenomenally difficult challenge. Now, what they like about coming to the Hartree is that, they can get access to equipment that they would never be able to afford. They can't build a business plan around getting access to it. But once they've got the results, they can then take that to the venture capitalists and start to build up from there. So for me, that area, that 10 to 100 type SME activity is really one of the more exciting areas that we've been working with.
Greg, why don't you give us a sort of final summation of all this, having wrestled with so many of these questions yourself?
Well, I think Julia's got a great task ahead of her. I'm sure she's helped by AI in the analysis of this. We didn't have the advantage of that at the time, whereas some of its summarising capability, I'm sure, is being put to use. Just to pick up on some of the points, there's clearly an international context for industrial strategy. That said, I don't think it can wait or should wait to look at the conduct of the incoming US administration, and an approach that analyses and identifies and extends your strengths, I think is pretty weatherproof anyway. There's questions of trade policy, but in terms of making sure that you're making the best use of what you've got, I think that's a kind of no regrets approach, whatever the international context is. To David's point, David Connell makes an important point about the kind of sale of companies before they've reached their full sort of global impact. I think some of the reforms that Jeremy Hunt started and Rachel Reeves is continuing in terms of, Jeremy started what he called the Edinburgh reforms, and Rachel's talked about the Mansion House reforms, to make it more possible to get investment, to make use of the importance that the city is in our economy. I think that is right, and perhaps it's an exhibit in my, kind of recommendation that we should look at some of the regulatory changes to make a big difference, rather than just looking for, as it were, sort of public disbursements of money. But there's more to be done on that. And then in terms of the question of whether it's just the kind of the sort of high-end sectors, I think this is a really important point, because if you think, as I do, that we have a productivity problem for the whole economy, then actually you've got some sectors that may not be the most sort of fashionable sectors in technology terms, say hospitality, for example. Millions of people are employed in hospitality in this country, and in many ways, going back to an earlier question, some of their practices are pretty limited in terms of the application of existing technologies that are available, and there may be profit in thinking about what new technologies are available there. So if you really want to make a lot of difference to a lot of people, and in aggregate to the UK economy, I think we shouldn't ignore sectors that may not be the most obviously salient ones when it comes to new technologies. So I hope that there will be, in the approach to the industrial strategy, an interest in and a concern for sectors like that. I could mention food and drink, for example, in which I think there's a lot that we can do, especially to diffuse the take-up of technology and industrial strategy. And I hope that'll be part of the conversation.
Very good, Mike. Well, thank you to all of our speakers here, because it's been, I think, a really excellent event with a lot of experience of people who wrestled with these dilemmas in business or in public policy coming together. Thank you to our sponsors, Airto. We do appreciate that support. There is going to be an email survey following this event, so do feel free to give us your reactions and feedback if you're able to, please. There'll be a recording on the Foundation's website tomorrow. For those of you here in the room, there are drinks and canapes outside. And for those of you participating online, I'm terribly sorry that you won't be able to join us for that. Thank you all very much indeed.